Welcome to the Concord Historical Society's first ever virtual membership meeting. As you are well aware, these are exceptional times and not something we had planned. But here we are in the basement of the Concord Museum and Event Center, and we're ready to move forward to try to celebrate our 50th year of existence. I am pleased to tell you that the executive committee remains the same. I, Vivian Boyd, will return as president. Brad Munamori is first vice president. Gail Van Tassel, second vice president. Carol Kelsch is secretary, and Lynn Higgins wears the hat of treasurer, among other duties. Let me introduce you to our newest board member, Janet Gagan. Janet has resided in Concord for 30 years. After she retired from Pacific Bell, she began a second career overseeing information technology departments in higher education. Janet was a member of the board of directors for the Willows Theater Company and past member of the Main Street Martinez Revitalization Committee. She has a master's degree in business administration from Kennedy University. Her interests are new technologies, local theater production, pickleball, history, books, and bibliographies. We also want to recognize with a moment of silence our active members who passed away within the last year. We recognize Gloria Matson, Eleanor Bisso, Hermino Tribino, Anna Ginocchio, Jerry Regani, Ray McKinnon, Paul Larson, David Craig, Margaret Floyd, Cosmo Tadachi, Kent Cabriel, Alex Janke, Catherine Lagoria. Our dear members who are no longer with us. In this, our 50th year, we are celebrating growing up together, the history of Concord and the history of the Concord Historical Society. Our motto is preserving the past to protect the future. This is specific to the town of Concord. In the bigger picture, Pearl Buck, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author, wrote, "To understand today, you have to research yesterday." With that in mind, John Keibel and I will begin our presentation, Growing Up Together.
Searching yesterday that Pearl Buck mentions, the Troopkin, a small tribelet of the greater Bay Miwok Native Americans, were the first human inhabitants of our valley. Dominated by a great mountain to their south, the Troopkin lived along the valley's streams that flowed north to the wide Tule marshes on the edge of Sassoon Bay. They shared the valley and the oak-covered hills with tremendous herds of elk, deer, and antelope. Salmon filled the streams. Grizzly bears roamed the foothills. It wasn't until 1772 that Spanish explorers, led by Captain Pedro Fages and Father Juan Crespi, became the first outsiders to cross this area. In 1774, just 4 years later, Lieutenant Colonel Juan Batista de Anza, Lieutenant Jose Joaquin Moraga, and Father Pedro Font, after leading 30 soldiers and their families 1,800 miles from Mexico north to Monterey, California, would be the next Europeans to visit the valley. I wonder, how did the Troopkin respond to these visitors?
Well, John, Jose Moraga, in writing a letter home, wrote, "It is now very late, and my supplies were getting low, for which reason I decided that before they were completely used up, to go to explore the river and seek a ford by which to pass from one side to the other, and at the same time to see if I might discover its source. Then an unusual thing happened to me with the Indians of those villages. It was this. When they saw me seeking a crossing over the river, without asking me a single thing, they showed me a ford with ease, I was able to pass from one side to the other, they themselves going ahead of the horses, serving as a guide, an action for which I thanked them, and for which I attempted to reward them with glass beads, a present much esteemed by them. It is certain that these and the rest of the Indians whom I encountered while my exploration lasted, I found affable, generous, and not at all mistrustful of communication with us.
In 1828, Juan Salvio Pacheco, whose ancestors were soldier colonists with Anza, petitioned the Mexican government for lands in the valley. A native Californian and retired Spanish militiaman, Juan Salvio received the Rancho Monte del Diablo land grant in 1834. The 17,921-acre grant covered our valley from the Walnut Creek Channel east to the hills, and generally from the Mount Diablo foothills north to Sassoon Bay, as the outline on the map indicates. In the 1850s and 1860s, the new California cities on the coast and in the Central Valley were creating a major demand for foodstuffs and raw materials. A new town called Pacheco, adjacent to Rancho Monte del Diablo, prospered as an industrial and shipping center. Its unique inland deep-water channel permitted supply ships easy access to the produce and products of what today is central Contra Costa County. Pacheco's prosperity was short-lived. A series of fires and floods and resulting silting up of its ship channel rendered Pacheco's wharves and warehouses useless. A major earthquake in 1868 accelerated the search by the town's devastated merchants for a safer location. Juan Salvio Pacheco, together with his son Fernando and his son-in-law Francisco Galindo, provided the solution. In 1868, the three of them hired Luis Castro, Alameda County surveyor, to survey 20 acres for a town on the bluffs near Juan Salvio Pacheco's adobe at the center of his rancho. They called their new town Todos Santos, or All Saints, and in 1869 offered free lots to merchants and residents of Pacheco. Todos Santos was situated diagonally across the road that connected Clayton and the busy coal fields nearby to the old docks at Pacheco. The new town's 20 acres included 19 blocks and a public plaza or square. The town's perimeter was marked by Bonifacio Street, East Street, Contra Costa Street, that's today's Clayton Road, and Galindo Street. Almost immediately after Todos Santos was founded in 1868, residents changed the town's name to Concord. Just about as quickly, the town began to grow. Cattle and sheep, along with grapes, walnuts, and other crops, taking root outside of the original downtown, which itself saw the number of its businesses spring up around the plaza. During the 1870s, Concord's first schools, Queen of All Saints Catholic Church, and the first of 13 saloons opened. A decade later, in the 1880s, First Presbyterian and First Christian churches began services. Hotels, blacksmith shops, a livery stable, banks, and small retail get going. Our first fire hall also was built in that decade, the 1880s. It would later serve as City Hall and still later as our police department. It was this decade, too, when telephone service became available. The first telephone exchange on the Pacific Coast was established in San Francisco in 1878. Concord's exchange was the fifth to be set up in Northern California. It opened in 1881 on the second floor of the Randall Brothers store, site today of Brendan Theater. So-called farmer lines had preceded telephone exchanges in Concord. A group of farmers desiring telephone service would band together, elect officers, pool money to purchase materials, and erect a simple line connecting their homes. This wire was placed atop barbed wire fence posts. One such line from Dr. Francis Neff's home ran along Willow Pass Road as far as the McCain and Geringer ranches. Because it worked so well, As long as the weather was dry and livestock left the barbed wire fences in one piece, others bought in. Additional fence-top telephone lines were strung, connecting homes and farms along Clayton Road and Ignacio Valley Road. By 1899, a telephone directory included Concord. Randall Brothers are listed as agents, followed by 5 customers, telephone customers: Merchants Burgess and Noble, Concord Meat Market, Dr. Mackenzie, General Merchandise Navis and Beebe, of course Dr. Neff, and the Southern Pacific Company Depot. During the 1890s, the town livery stable was on Salvio Street across from the plaza. The Pacheco, Concord, Clayton stage line stopped there on its way from the coal mines near Clayton at Nortonville and Summersville to Pacheco and Martinez by way of Concord. Vivian, if you wanted to go to San Francisco in those days, this is your stagecoach. You'd get on board, take it to Martinez. There you would catch a boat that would take you to San Francisco. Southern Pacific Railroad came to town during the 1890s as well, crossing the southeast side of town on Market Street, between our present-day Park and Shop and Highway 242.
Well, among the many businesses that operated in Concord were a plethora of saloons. The Japanese community opened a school in downtown Concord. The purpose of the school was to teach their second-generation children the Japanese language and culture. They complained that their children had to pass by bad influences surrounding the saloons while going to and coming from their lessons. Needless to say, the children were intrigued by all they saw and heard. Years later, the Japanese Cultural Center was built on Treat Boulevard, taking care of the influence problem and providing the Japanese community with an important center. And the larger Concord community with the Japanese Festival, held the second weekend in August every year. Of course, with the exception of this year.
So, as we heard, many citizens of Concord found the saloons and bad influences distasteful. They wished to make Concord a proper community. The solution appeared to be incorporation. Then elected officials could pass ordinances that would improve life in Concord. The ensuing election on February 4th, 1905 was hard fought. The saloon owners recognized that the way of life they held so dear was being threatened. On the other hand, to ensure an incorporation victory, Joseph Boyd and Herbert Elworthy devised a clever plan to outwit the saloon owners. On the evening before the election, Boyd and Elworthy gathered up all the drifters and transients they could find and put them up for the night in Lambert's Hotel, shown here. Early the next morning, these men were taken to the polls before the opposition could induce them to change their allegiance. In this way, a slim victory was achieved. Incorporation was passed by a 2-vote margin, and Joseph Boyd, he became Concord's first mayor. Riding on the coattails of incorporation came the call for a mass meeting at the Oddfellows Hall in October 1906 to collect books and to open a reading room in the Firemen's Hall. A library board was elected, and newly appointed librarian Elizabeth Skinner oversaw cataloging of the 62 donated books and issuing of membership cards at, get this, 25 cents per month. Concord's subscription library was open for business by the end of 1906. Over the next 10 years, the popularity of the library multiplied, as did the size of its collection. The library moved from the Firemen's Hall into the larger Randall building, and then in 1916 to its third home in the Foskett and Elworthy building, today's Scipolini's Pizza. 301 books, 239 borrowers. Using Carnegie Foundation funds, Concord's first independent free library was built for $2,500 in 1917 on Salvio Street on that side of the plaza, actually not very far from where today's 4-faced clock stands in the plaza. It operated there until 1957.
How many of you have fond memories of the small, well-appointed library which sat within the middle of the plaza. It was an institution to many of the city's children, with its pleasing, well-proportioned Spanish-style architecture, graceful steps leading up to the front door, and a friendly librarian to help you find a specific book.
Offering the same friendly service today, our current Concord Library opened in 1958. Beside the library, the plaza was also popular for the shade from the many eucalyptus trees and a bandstand where Sunday afternoon concerts drew a crowd. By 1931, these eucalyptus trees, suffering from old age, were cut down. Civic groups staged benefits to raise money for a plaza improvement project, the idea of businessman and gardener extraordinaire Paul Keller. An 800-foot-long pergola, thought to be the largest in the world, was completed in 1934. Many varieties of wisteria were planted. For many years, a wisteria festival was held in our lovely plaza. Didn't all this have a special significance for your family, Vivian?
Oh, it certainly did. I arrived in Concord in 1947 in the company of my mother and grandmother. My aunts and uncles had settled in other California cities. Concord was just waking up from World War II. I asked my mother why she had chosen Concord over all the other places she could have picked for us. She told me it was the wisteria, the pergola and the wisteria. She had never seen a central plaza as beautiful as the park in Concord.
Well, yesteryear's pergola is gone, but it is remembered today at the Concord Heritage Center with this arbor, which one day will be draped with wisteria as well. This Eagle Scout project was completed by Boy Scout Jackson Castle the summer of 2019. The decades of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s saw tremendous growth, as these numbers here suggest, growing from 1,400 to 7,000 population in just 10 years. Not surprisingly, residential subdivisions sprung up everywhere. Shopping centers developed near these homes. Park and Shop began operations in 1957, and Sun Valley opened in 1966 as major regional shopping destinations. With this growth, reminders of Concord's early years, the once proud turn-of-century buildings, began to disappear. Sensitive to this, Concord's Cultural Commission asked equally concerned citizens to establish a Concord Historical Society. Your society's first general meeting was held on October 22, 1970, at the Concord Library. Officers elected, among others, included Jerry Wentling as president and Ruth Galindo, interestingly, the last direct descendant of Concord co-founder Francisco Galindo. She was elected as first vice president. Our quarterly newsletter began a year later. To this day, it balances reports on society doings with articles highlighting local history.
In 1974, the Landmark Ordinance was passed by the City of Concord, recognizing this historical significance of the following places: the Maltby Mansion, Todos Santos Plaza, Don Salvio Pacheco Adobe, Don Fernando Pacheco Adobe, Don Francisco Galindo Home, the Bibber House, Concord Fire Hall, the Cable House, the Webb Soto House, the Ivy House, the Newstatter House, Mount Diablo High School site, the Maltby McKinnon House, and eventually others. This put a focus on the maintenance of some of the early structures, preserving them for posterity.
As the 20th century was coming to a close and growth continued, there was an exception to this growth. Naval Weapons Station Concord was established north of town in World War II in 1942. It became the nation's largest West Coast ammunition transshipment port in support of our troops during World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and as recently as the Persian Gulf War. By the mid to late 1990s, however, the station began to downsize. The need for ammunition had decreased. New types of weaponry and methods of supply were in play. The nation was closing surplus military installations. All of this foreshadowed the weapons station closure in November 2005, and what has become today's Concord Reuse Project and Concord Hills Regional Park. The regional park in the large green area on the eastern side of the map here, and the Reuse Project running basically from North Concord BART to behind Concord High School.
In 1994, the Society opened a resource center in its office on Sutter Street. At last, the Society had a place to work on the collection of artifacts, answer questions, and answer phones. Photographs and printed material long kept in closets, under beds, in boxes, and garages were cataloged and systematically stored. Larger artifacts were still stored off-site. But with an address, phone number, the orderly collection of documents and artifacts, the History Society was officially open for business. The city charged us a minimum for rent, but with the proviso that eventually the city would do something with that building. In 2014, we received word from the city that we must vacate the Sutter Street site. A well-timed and generous donation by the disbanding Women's Club offered its building on Farm Bureau Road, and that became the Resource Center until 2017, when the collection was moved to the Concord Museum and Event Center. By the early 2000s, a number of books were published with members from the Concord Historical Society contributing to their content. The books chronicled Concord's early days and have become a much-used source of many articles published in the newsletter.
History of Concord, Its Progress and Promise was the first one, and it came out in 1986, covering Concord's earliest history through the 1980s. Concord's dynamic half-century, the years since World War II, picks up and brings us into the 1990s. The most recent Concord history books include Behind the Barbed Wire, History of Naval Weapons Station Concord, and Images of America, Concord. These last two came out in 2009.
The first museum opened in the Kelly House in 2005. Under the direction of Jan Trolin and Joan Reed, many volunteers helped put displays together. John Keibel, Paul Larson, and Pete Vasconi, to name a few. Because of the cost of renting the home, it was decided to close after 2 years until the museum had a permanent home. But it proved to be training for what was to come. When Ruth Galindo died in 1999, she gave her home to the city to be used as a museum dedicated to the history of Concord and her family's involvement in that history. After stabilizing the foundation and painting the outside, the city sold the home to the Concord Historical Society for $1. The furniture was put in storage. Two champions of the Galindo home, Mark Willis and Chuck Gabriziak, oversaw the restoration of the home. It opened to the public as a museum in 2012. When the economy turned bad and the developer who owned the Masonic Temple decided not to develop the property, the Concord Historical Society sued the city for ownership of the Masonic Temple. Ownership of the Masonic Temple was turned over to the Society in 2010 with the requirement that it be relocated within 3 years or forfeit. We moved the temple one day before the window of time would expire.
That was quite a day. That was a cool spring Saturday morning in May 2013. But we all gathered, warm with excitement. My father in a wheelchair, mother and I, we were present too. What a scene. Moving that monstrous Concord Masonic Temple across Clayton Road to its current site and function as the Concord Museum and Event Center, cable taut and winch truck whining. We all held our breath. as the building moved slowly down one curb, across the road, up another curb, and lurched to a stop above its new foundation. Phew, all in one piece, and not one cracked window pane.
We changed the name of the Masonic Temple to the Concord Museum and Event Center, which better identifies its function, both as an event center and a museum once it has been completed.
From its humble conception as a surveyor's drawing, Concord has grown to become our home today. Your Concord Historical Society exists to record and share that rich history.
Well, this concludes our hop, skip, and a jump through the highlights of the history of Concord and the history of Concord's Historical Society. None of this is possible without our faithful members. Together, we preserve the past to protect the future. Keep well, stay safe. Good night.